Hello, I am Edith Newmeyer, and I am the author of the book, The Mystery of Adam. Well, today I want to talk or do a book review of Jean Edwards. And the book is called The Christian Woman Set Free. Okay, hope you can see this. This is the book. Okay, it is by the Seed Sowers Publishing Company. And so I want to review this book today because it's a really great book. On top it says 1700 years is long enough. Women freed from second-class citizenship in the kingdom of God. I think this book was really worth reading. And it is really a great addition to my book, because in it, Jean Edwards goes into more detail when it comes to the history of how male dominance influenced the church. He definitely did a really great, intense study. But first, let me tell you a little bit about Jean Edwards. Jean Edwards, unfortunately, already died. But he used to be a Southern Baptist pastor. He went to a Southern Baptist seminary. And then after years, he realized that the traditional church was not biblical. And so he went into the church planting ministry. He planted house churches. So he was very active in the house church movement. And then in 2005, this is published in 2005, he came out with this book, The Christian Woman Set Free, which is really built probably most likely on his research and his studies about the house church. And that the house church, or that the original church that Christ and Paul intended, did not have a hierarchy. Okay, so this is what he writes about. The first part is how the Greek philosophers, okay, influenced the early church and most of all the Catholic Church. Most of the early church fathers, St. Augustine, for instance, I think the next one he mentions Origen. They were all, or Jerome, there's another one. They were all Greek philosophers. And so they based their ideas on Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. And all three of them had a very, very, very negative belief about women. In the beginning, he writes, let's see, I'm going to go back. Some of the saying, I don't see anything about Saint Jerome. This is what he said: woman is a temple built over sewer. It is contrary to the order of nature and of the law for women to speak in a gathering. Now, that's what Jerome said. Okay, and that he was instrumental in translating the Bible into Latin, and he made a lot of mistakes because of his belief that women were not even human. Okay, so here's St. Augustine. By herself, woman is not of the image of God. The man, on the other hand, alone is the image of God. St. Augustine was a contemporary of Jerome, and they both thought the same thing. Why? Because they were influenced by Plato, Aristotle, and Socrates. Okay, so that is what came into our churches. Okay, it got stuck so deep in the Roman Catholic Church that even the reformers were so influenced by it, talking about Luther and Calvin, that it was just very hard to get rid of. Especially, I think I read a lot about Luther, and I shared it with you, that Luther was a lot more liberal with women, and not as condemning of women as I think Calvin was. Calvin was really a radical, I want to call feminizer, or a misogynist, or just he was just really bad when it came to women. And this author, Jean, said, well, guess what? Well, let's see here. Here's something that Calvin said. All women are born that they may acknowledge themselves as inferior to the male. That's what Calvin said. Okay? And again, so he writes how these Greek philosophers brought their ideas about women into the church. He was writing that the Greek culture did not accept women. Women were not to be heard. They were not to be seen. Okay, so so when we read the letters that Paul wrote, we have to understand that as well, because this idea of women not having the right to talk in the church, not having the right, to not wear a headdress, because that came from the Greek. A married woman in the Greek culture had to wear a scarf. Okay, in the Greek culture, when she went in public. Okay, now he writes about the Greek culture and where this demeaning attitude about women came from, and which infiltrated totally the Roman Catholic Church. And not only the Roman Catholic Church, but before the Roman Catholic Church was even established, these converts, these philosophers, converts, like Jerome and others, Augustine, they just brought that into the church. And again, it was just stuck so deeply and rooted in the church that it was very hard to get rid of it. Matter of fact, it's hard to get rid of it to this day, because see, since the reformers did not change something about this situation that existed with women, they didn't change it. Not even Luther did. That's why it continued in all the Reformed churches until today. Okay, so yeah, we reformed some of the things in the church, but not all of the things. And this is also, of course, how we kept hierarchy in the church. Then he goes into also how Constantine, after Constantine, how women were just totally put down again. I just addressed it really shortly in my book, just saying that all the gains they made under Paul and the first churches were totally taken away once the Roman Catholic Church took over. I mean, that was the end for women. Okay, they were considered as harlots, Okay, if you were not married and you didn't have that protection under your husband, you were nothing more than a harlot in the Roman Catholic Church. That's just the way it was. And then he is also writing about the witch hunt. How many women, that again, that attitude about women, again, then really accumulated and had its height during the witch hunt, where many, I mean, millions of women died. Okay, millions of women died, miserably died. Okay, tortured, burned, miserably died. And then he's also talking about people like King James, um, of course, who was an English king and had the Bible translated into the English language, but how he influenced how this Bible was translated into the English language. So he was really good on that. I mean, I really liked that part. It was very educational. I never thought about it. Um, so, for instance, one of the things that King James mistranslated was the word silence in First Timothy 2:11. The original Greek word is hesvikia, and in First Timothy 2:11 they translated it as silent, where in Second Thessalonians 3:12 that word was translated with quietness. So you can see the difference. Okay, it's not women learn in quietness, but learn in silence. Okay, there's a difference. You cannot speak at all, or you need to be quiet. Okay, quietness does not mean you cannot speak. You just have a quiet demeanor. So I think that is very important. Also, the word diakonos um, was, which is literally translated as deacons. When it came to Phoebe, was translated as servant. Same word, but they made a distinction. In all the other verses, diakonos was translated as deacon, but when it came to a woman, specifically Phoebe, it was translated as servant. So those were just two examples that I underlined, because all his research was just really excellent. So this is what, came, the translations, they, and Jerome's translation, of course, into the Latin was the same way. Okay, he also used specific words that would demean and keep women in silence. So then he goes, the next part, his third part, goes into the revolutionist. Okay, a revolutionist for women's liberty. And of course, he now goes in detail into Jesus, how he liberated women. Um, and an interesting thing that he wrote, which I didn't know either, was that in the temple in Jerusalem, built by Herod and Jewish religious leaders, women were confined to an area called the Court of the Women, which was 15 steps lower than the court designated for Jewish men. There were no such courts to divide men and women in the tabernacle, in the wilderness, nor in Solomon's temple. Isn't that interesting too? Wow. I thought that was, wow, shocking. Shocking. Okay? Again, you can see that originally, and I said that in my last videos, that Paul was very equal with women. Okay? He did not put women under men as much as that he wanted to protect them. Okay? He wanted to protect them. I'm sure he was aware also, in a male-dominated world, women needed protection. And that's the time, under Moses, where it was a very male-dominated world. And unfortunately, of course, as the Jews went away from the law of Moses and interpreted the law their own way, and things were written down in Talmud, and he writes about that as well, that Talmud is the one that puts down women and that treats them as property, not the law of Moses. So that is very important. That's something that he also, brought out. And then, of course, he showed examples of how important women were during Jesus's time, or how important women were for Jesus, not during Jesus's time, and how he uh, um, supported them and stepped in for their benefit, put it that way. Okay. So then, of course, he goes to Paul, um, and he writes about how Paul was really not discriminating against women, but he was also writing, though, in a cultural context. Okay. Some of the letters, for instance, the Corinthian letters, we don't understand very well because we don't know what kind of questions. He said there were questions sent by the Corinthians to Paul, and he used these questions to write the first letter to the Corinthians. And we don't know what questions they had, but sometimes, see, the letters had no punctuation in the Greek language, no punctuation whatsoever. So it's kind of hard to say whether it was a question or it was a statement that Paul, um, wrote. But the bottom line, again, with any of the letters is that Paul did not discriminate against women at all, and that he was not telling the churches that women should be silent in church, or that they could not teach, or that they could not do anything, because that would contradict basic things that he said in the letters. Okay, when something is contradicting another part, then we have to question it and say, okay, is this what Paul really wants to say? Is there something else we need to know? Okay. So, and then, of course, then he's talking about also the fact that in Corinth, the church in Corinth had different cultures mixed in the church, and different ways of doing things. Like I already said, the Greek, the women covered their head. Then you had the Romans, who never covered their head, never ever. Then you had the Jews, who, I don't think the Jews covered their head as well, but they had other restrictions. And then they had the Orientals, who again covered the head. So you had 4 different cultures mixed in this church, and that caused problems. And so in the letter to the Corinthians, Paul addressed those. I thought it was really a good. Again, he also says, women, also addresses women who taught with Paul, like who is it? Let's see, a lady in Philippi, which I mentioned in my last video, Lydia. Okay, and he also mentions, of course, Priscilla, who was teaching Apollos, and Paul did never ever say anything. So he goes very, very clear into that Paul was not a male chauvinist. Okay, he was a liberator of women, and of course, again, think about it. He was part of his culture too, and he had to learn. Okay, he couldn't just overnight change what was told to him for thousands of years, really. Okay, so thousands of years of history, he couldn't just put that away either. And so slowly he had to learn. Okay. So anyways, really basically, that's what he's talking. And then there's on the 18th chapter, he says, are women to be silent in church? Question mark. Women are not to be silent in church. Okay. So I already explained that a little bit, that no, women have equal status in the church. So yes, if you're interested, you should really read it. I think it's a very great edition. I really thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, and he comes down very, very hard on men. Is men who continue to want to dominate women and who continue to say there's a hierarchy in the church. Um, so I think that's pretty good. He just kind of sets these guys straight. So, anyways, that is my book review of The Christian Woman Set Free. So I will continue next time, and I will finish up today. And I hope again that you may buy the book and do some more studies about women. And I think it probably would be a great book for complementarian to read. Really, really think that would be definitely a book for complementarian. There is just no, uh, Piper should read it, Grudem should read it. And that would really help those people. Anyways, and he's not necessarily one of these typical egalitarians, okay? Um, he just simply wrote what he experienced in his own ministry, that women should be free, women should not be subjugated, but women should have equal rights in the church and in marriage. So I'll talk to you soon.